Hi, my name is David Rippy. I am a certified hypnotherapist where I take clients into a deep hypnotic state where they can share details of a previous life. This is the chapter titled Lieutenant Hertzof and the Age of Aquarius in my book, The Immortal Soul. Enjoy.
Lieutenant Hertzof and the Age of Aquarius. This reading was conducted for a female subject. Her recall, knowledge, and subsequent journey through the past life and her death afterward were recounted with great clarity and detail. Unexpectedly and without any prompting, at the end of the life journey as Lieutenant Hertzof, she shares the current cycle humankind has entered, the Age of Aquarius. The reading starts at the end of the hypnotic induction. David, so I'm counting down from 3 to 2. You know that you're safe and protected, floating along in your beautiful golden bubble of light. In your mind's eye, you will start to be able to see outside of this bubble, wanting to observe more of your journey. You're looking down over a beautiful, heavenly sea of flowers as you float above the ground, just floating along on the whispers of the winds of your lives. As I count down to 1, you feel the love, the protection, and the light from the golden energies that surround you. Wanting to explore more of your past and learn things in the process to help you on your way forward. Less uncertain, less fearful of the dark, knowing that you are always protected and loved on the entire journey. So as you hear my voice, totally alert in mind but relaxed, you're starting to see not only the field of flowers in your mind and the bubble you are floating in, but also you're going to relax enough to start to see some other things that are in your journey. Looking out of your protective bubble, I want you to think of a time you knew in the past. As you hear my voice, awake in mind, and not falling asleep, describe to me what your mind is showing you now, and I want you to tell us about it. Tell me what you see. Subject, light snoring sounds. David, what do you see? Subject, I see a tank. David, okay, a tank. Like a water tank? What kind of tank? Subject, like a military tank. David, a military tank. Is it? Can you describe it to me a little? Subject, it's gray. It has a circle and a number painted on the side. David, okay. Subject, men are inside, and the top is open. David, and what kind of terrain are you crossing with this tank? Subject, the ground is wet. The sky is cloudy. There's smoke in the air. David, and where do you think this tank is right now? Subject, people are speaking another language. David, and you're hearing them speak in the tank? Subject, I think they're speaking German. David, do you see what year it is? Subject, I don't know. David, can you give me the name of a town where this tank is or near? Subject, we're near Brussels. David, do you see yourself in the tank or are you just observing it? Subject, I'm just observing. David, why is it important for you to observe and see this tank? Subject, pause, the men inside it are in my company. David, do you remember what company that might be? Subject, long pause, I'm hearing 2 numbers, 3rd Reich, 18th Battalion. David, 3rd Reich, 18th Battalion. Do you remember who was the leader or the general of this battalion or this regiment? Subject, his name starts with an M. David, is he a general or what is his command? Subject, he's a general. David, do you see in your mind who he reports to? Subject, no. David, and why are you moving toward Brussels? Do you know? Why are you in Brussels? Subject, we just captured it. David, was everybody happy about that? Subject, yes. David, do you see now what year or month you captured Brussels? Do you see a month or what was it like that time of the year? Subject, it's cold. David, do you remember what month? Was it before Christmas or after? Do you remember? Subject, I don't remember. David, okay, but you know it was cold. When you think about it, do you see a month in your mind that might resonate with you? Subject, pause, there are still leaves on the trees. David, are they turning brown or are they already brown? Subject, yes. David, could it have been before Christmas, you think? Do you remember if you celebrated before or after the capture of Brussels Christmas? Pause. See any signs of celebration around Europe? Subject: I don't know. David: Now, how long were you in Brussels, or how long was this tank there? Subject: 10 months. David: Were you part of this tank? What is your connection there? Subject: The men inside are in my company. David: Okay. You are just observing. Do you see yourself in Brussels? Subject: Yes. David: Can you tell me what you look like? What your uniform looks like? Subject: I'm tall. I have dark blonde hair and a mustache and gray eyes. David: Do you remember your rank? Subject: I'm a lieutenant. David: Do you see, even if it is in German, do you see your first name? What pops into your head? Subject: Long pause. I don't know my name. David: But you feel you were a lieutenant. Subject: Yes. David: Do you remember when you enlisted? What year was that? How old were you? How old were you when you went toward a fight? Subject: 23. David: So you were 23 years old. Do you remember what month you were born? Subject: No. David: Do you feel relaxed enough? Do you feel like you can see everything clearly? What did you do in Brussels? Was it a big fight or a little fight? Was it easier than you thought going in? Subject: The town was smoking. David: Was the town Brussels or one right outside of Brussels? Subject: Outside of Brussels. David: Do you remember looking at a map as a lieutenant? Do you see where that town was on the map in relation to Brussels? Was it circled red somewhere on the map, somewhere near Brussels? What did that town start with? What was the first letter? Subject: It starts with I. David: The town started with an I. Do you remember if it was north of Brussels or south? Subject: Southwest. David: Southwest of Brussels. Do you remember how many cliques or kilometers from Brussels it was roughly? Subject: No. David: Do you know how many miles it was? Subject: No. David: Do you remember what kind of tank you were observing or with? What kind of tank was it? Does it have a name? Subject: It has a name. It's a name that's well known today. Panzer? Panzer. David: Was it made by Germans in Germany? Subject: Yes. David: Do you remember how much it weighed roughly? How big was it? Subject: It was a newly developed machine for war. It was powerful. Panzer means armor. David: Did you ever get to ride in the tank? Subject: Yes. David: Was it fun? Subject: Yes. David: Do you remember what kind of gun it had and what size of projectiles it shot? Subject: It killed anything in its path. David: Do you remember how far the bullets would go when you guys would shoot at other tanks? Subject: Over 50 yards and much farther than that. David: So easily over 50 yards? Now as you are looking at that life as a lieutenant, and you said you were in this little town, do you see the name of the little town that started with an I? Do you see that now? Subject: There is a s and an in the name. David: So I's in. Were those the first 3 letters or what do you see? Subject: I don't know. David: That's okay. You said it was kind of cold. There were still leaves on the trees. It was cold though. Subject: MHM. David: Did it feel like November, December, or October? Do you remember? Subject: November. David: Okay. Middle of November or end, when you think you rode into that town? Subject: We arrived in the beginning of November. David: So pretty much the beginning of November. And you are pretty sure as you think about it in your mind's eye, and what you hear in your mind, is that the town maybe started with an I, but also had an N and A's. Was it 2 syllables you think, or just 1? Subject: 2. David: So 2 syllables? Subject: Yes. David: Was it in French or what was the language? Subject: I don't know. David: You didn't recognize it? Subject: No. David: Did you see any letters besides I and N's? Any others you can tell? Subject: R. David: Which one? Subject, the letter R. David, so there was an I, and an R. And what other vowels were there? Subject, I can't tell. The map is torn. David, I understand. Can you see any other consonants or not really? Subject, sigh, no. David, that's okay. Now let's go forward a bit. You said you stayed in Brussels or outside of Brussels in this little town for 10 months. Is that correct? Subject, yes. David, and you think you were around the age of 23 at the time, right? Subject, yes. David, do you see your name now? Your first name? What letters were in your first name? Subject, deep breathing. David, and I want you just to hear my voice and no other noises. Go ahead. Subject, my first name isn't on my uniform, just the first letter. David, and what was the first letter, do you remember? Subject, K. David, so on your name tag, when you are staring at your uniform as an observer, give me the last name. Look at the name tag. Take your time. Subject, it starts with an H. David, starts with an H. What is the next letter? What is the vowel? Is there a vowel next? What did it sound like in your mind if somebody addressed you and you turned around suddenly and saw it? Subject, pause, the name Hertz. Hertz. David, so you think that was your name or was there more to the name? Was it one syllable? Subject, it was something like Hertz, but I think that's just the way that name sounds. Hertzof or Hertzel. David, so, something with the first syllable being Hertz. Subject, yeah. David, now let's just look at that second syllable and forget about Hertz. What does that second syllable sound like? Subject, off. David, say it again. Subject, off. David, so like Hertzof OFF? Subject, OF. David, so you think your last name had 2 syllables? Subject, yeah. David, and the first name, what did that start with again? Give me that first letter of your name again. Subject, K. David, so it felt like your name, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it might have been K. Hertzof. Subject, yes. David, does that sound right? And you think you were a lieutenant in this battalion. Is that correct? Subject, yes. David, and how old are you again roughly? Subject, 23. David, were you married? Subject, yes. David, did you write letters to your wife while you were away? Subject, yes. David, and do you remember, what was her name? Subject, pause, Laurel. David, how do you say her name again? Subject, Laurel. David, Laurel like Laurel. Subject, yeah. David, did she have a middle name by any chance? Do you remember any nicknames or middle names? Subject, long pause. David, any coming to mind? Subject, pause, no. David, okay. Did you have children? Subject, yes. David, and let's think about that for a moment as you watch them play. How many children did you and Laurel have? Subject, we had 2 sons. David, 2 sons. Now when you were 23, how old was Laurel roughly? Was she older or younger than you? Subject, she was 18. David, so when you were 23, she was 18 years old. How old were you when you got married? Subject, pause, 22. David, so you had been married a year before you left, is that correct? Subject, yeah. David, now do you remember what year you were married? What year was that? What was the wedding date? What month was it? Subject, pause with deep breathing, I don't know. David, did you get married in a church or did you get married at home? Where did you get married? Do you see the wedding? Subject, yes. David, good. Let's go to that wedding for a moment, then we will go back to the children. Looking at that wedding, what town did you get married in? Subject, I don't remember the name. David, do you remember what religion the church was? Subject, Catholic. David, so it was a Catholic church, and you had a Catholic priest do the wedding ceremony? Subject, yeah. David, do you see your parents there with you as you're getting married? Subject, no. David, they weren't at the wedding? Subject, no. David, now as just an observer, did they pass away? Subject, yeah. David, and what was your father's name that passed away, do you remember? Subject, his name was Derek. David, Derek. And what was his last name? Subject, David, was it the same as yours? Subject, Hertzof. David, say that again. Subject, pause, Hertzof. David, Hertzof. And do you remember your mother's first name? What was her name? Subject, pause, Marguerite. David, Marguerite. What were your children's names? Let's go look at your children. What were their names and how old were they when you left for war at 23? Subject, 2.5 and less than a year. David, do you remember those boys' names? Pause, what was one of the sons' names? Who was the oldest? Subject, John. David, John was the oldest. So he was about 2.5 when you left. Is that true? Subject, yes. David, what did you and your wife name the younger one? Do you remember? Subject, his name started with an R. David, with an R. Was it a long word or one syllable, do you think? Subject, it was not long. Raoul. David, it was like Raoul? Subject, yes. David, or something like that? And how would you spell that? Subject, no, Reef. R-E-I-F. David, Reef, what a nice name. And he was pretty young when you left, wasn't he? Subject, yeah. David, did you miss your boys and your wife? Subject, yeah. David, good. Now why did you leave? Did you have to leave? Was it required that you leave to go to war, or did you want to stay with your family? Did you think it was the right thing to do? What was your mindset when you decided to leave? When you were told to leave? Subject, I was doing my job. David, so you were doing your job. Was it a job that you felt was for the country, or what was it for? Subject, our boss told us what our job was, and we did our job. David, and who was your boss? Do you remember his name? Who was ahead of you as a lieutenant? Who is your immediate supervisor? What was his name? What was his rank? Subject, I don't remember his name. David, did you and your friends in the tank call him something, like some name that he probably wouldn't have liked or not? Do you remember? Subject, we didn't call him names. David, so everybody was pretty proper and did their job. Is that right? Subject, yeah. David, did you go home after the war, or what happened? Subject, I didn't go home. David, now you're just observing. I want you to just observe and not get emotionally involved. We're just looking at that life with you as a lieutenant, correct? Subject, sharp inhale, MHMM, yes. David, and I want you to just relax. And what was your last name again? Subject, Hertzof. David, now you're just going to view that life. You're not getting involved. You're not going to get emotional. You're just observing. That life is gone. It is done, and that is okay. And I want you to tell me as you see yourself, where did you go from that town outside of Brussels after the 10 months were up? Where did you go after that? Subject, pause, we traveled south. David, so you traveled south. That's good. Now let's go on that journey again together. We're leaving the small town outside of Brussels, where you have been for the previous 10 months. And we are going south, just kind of going along. How many tanks were in your battalion, do you think? Subject, 13. David, 13. And was your tank in the middle of the 13, or sort of in the front or the back? Where was your tank in that line of 13 as you looked down at it? Subject, there were 2 ahead of us. David, 2 ahead of you. Were you riding in the tank at the time when you were going south, or did you get there another way? Subject, I was in the tank. David, so you were in the tank with them. Were you a tank commander, or who ran the tank? Subject, another man. David, was he pretty good, the other man, your friend? Subject, my colleague. David, your colleague. Did you not like him too much, or how did you get along with the other men in the tank? Subject, he was a wise ass. David, so the tank commander was a wise ass, right? Subject, he thought he was the commander, but he just drove the thing. David, he thought he was kind of cool overall? Subject, yeah. David, what was his name? What was his first name? Subject, it started with a P. David, started with a P. Subject, Philip. David, great Philip. And what was his last name, when you looked at his tag or just kind of thought about it? What was his last name? What did it start with? Can you remember? Subject, I can't see his name. David, that's okay. How many people are in the tank with you? How many other guys besides you and Philip? Subject, 3. David, 3 other guys. And what were their names? Do you remember? Any other names? What were those guys' names? Pause. Do you have any buddies on the tank you were closer to? Subject, Jeremy. David, so Jeremy, was he a pretty good guy? Subject, yes. David, so he is a good friend of yours, is that what you are telling me? Subject, he was an honorable man. David, he was what? Subject, he was an honorable man. David, an honorable man. And what was Jeremy's last name? Subject, Buchanan. David, what's that? Subject, Buchanan. David, was he German? Subject, yes. David, he was German, but his name was Jeremy Buchanan, like the U.S. President Buchanan? Subject, yes. David, do you remember Jeremy's middle initial? Did he have one, or do you not remember? Subject, I don't know. David, what was Jeremy's job on the tank? What did he do while Philip was driving? Subject, he operated the machine gun. David, he operated the machine gun. What kind of bullets did it shoot? What was the caliber of those bullets? Pause. Were they big? Were they long? What would have Lieutenant Hertzof thought when he's looking at those bullets, as he's holding them in his hands, or holding that belt in his hands? How long were those bullets when you looked at those? Were they 3 inches, 4 inches, 1 inch? What size do you think those bullets were? Subject, about 3 inches long. David, now as a lieutenant, what was Philip's rank as the driver? What was his rank? Pause. Do you remember? Did you outrank him? Or were you guys both lieutenants? Subject, he was lower than me. David, he was lower than you? Subject, yes. David, so lower than a lieutenant. What was Jeremy? Subject, a colonel. David, oh, you're saying Jeremy was a colonel? Subject, yes. David, so Jeremy, who was riding in your tank, was a colonel. And his last name was what? Jeremy Buchanan? Is that what you thought? Subject, his name is B.U. David, say that again. Subject, his last name was B.U. David, and what was the rest? Subject, sounded like cannon, but I don't remember how it was spelled. David, but it was different than what we know as Buchanan, is that correct? Subject, yeah. David, and he was a colonel, is that what you remember? Subject, yeah. David, was it unusual to have a colonel riding in your tank, or was that pretty common? Was he the only colonel in those tanks? Subject, he was the only colonel. David, so he was allowed. He rode in your tank, is that correct? Subject, sometimes. David, so he was the only colonel of those 13 tanks. Is that correct? Subject, yeah. David, and he picked your tank, and that was the big moment when he rode in your tank, is that right? Subject, pause, he did what he wanted. David, was it nice having him on board, or did he make you a little nervous when you were going south? Subject, no, he was a reassuring person. David, so he made you feel safer having him in there because he's a pretty nice, honorable man. Is that correct? Subject, yeah. David, do you remember what Jeremy told you, the colonel? Did he tell you how far from Brussels you would be going when you headed south? Did he share that information with you? Subject, about a day's ride. David, a day's ride by tank, is that correct? Subject, yeah. David, so you went south, and you left that little town that started with an I. With 13 tanks, right? Subject, yeah. David, how far did you go and how fast were you going south? Do you remember? Was it kind of slow or maybe 15, 20 clicks just to be safe? What was the speed roughly? Subject, we were not in a hurry. David, you were just taking your time? Subject, yeah. David, were there concerns about enemy fire coming at you or something? Subject, yeah. David, was there a very big presence of American troops there at the time that you were a little concerned about? Subject, inhale deeply, American and British. David, so American and British troops, okay. Did you lose some friends? Not looking at yourself yet, but did you lose some other tanks in the process trying to make that ride south? Subject, we were ambushed. David, and how far south were you ambushed? Do you remember? Subject, we were at the border. The subject's breathing started to increase. I reiterated, you are only observing the life. David, and you were attacked near the border, is that what you are telling me? Subject, yeah. David, was it almost right at the border like, oh my God, this is not good ? Subject, yeah. Everything happened so fast. David, did you make it to the border at least or do you not remember? Subject, I don't remember. David, you just knew it was coming up, is that correct? Subject, yeah. David, did maybe Philip in the tank or someone say, the border is only about a couple of clicks away, or something like that? Subject, yeah. David, did Philip tell you how far away it was, or he didn't know because your tank was following the tank in front of it? Subject, he told me, but I don't remember. David, now I want you to just observe, don't get involved emotionally, we're just observing. Can you do that for me? Subject, yeah. Heavier breathing. Subject was starting to get more anxious. I reiterated, you are just observing, and you are not getting emotionally involved. This approach usually produces more clarity and focus, and keeps them from getting lost in the tragedy they are experiencing. David, I want you to just relax. You are protected. We are just looking at that life, and you are not getting emotional. Can you do that? Subject, yeah. David, softly tell me what happened. Who attacked you? Subject, we were pinned down by enemy fire. They must have known our coordinates. We didn't last long. David, did they take out all 13 tanks or what? Do you remember? Subject, they blew up 5. David, they blew up 5 of those tanks. And then there was 8 other tanks that didn't get blown up. Is that correct? Subject, yeah. David, and what happened to those people in the tanks? What happened to them? Did they jump out or run? How did that work? What did you see? And remember, you're just observing. Subject, they stopped, and they unloaded their machine gun fire, but we ran out of ammo before they did. David, and who was shooting that machine gun on your tank, do you remember? Who was that soldier again? Asking the subject similar questions later into the regression verifies the recall on very specific details. The subject's fast and accurate recall is notable. At this stage, they are deep enough in a superconscious state to fully embody the person they're describing. The state the subject is currently in would be no different than you're discussing your present life with someone. Subject, that was Jeremy. David, so Jeremy, and you like Jeremy, is that correct? Subject, yeah. David, so he was doing the machine gun and all of a sudden your bullets ran out, is that what you're telling me? Subject, yeah. David, and then what happened inside your tank? What happened then? What do you remember? And we are just observing. Subject, I remember the smell of gasoline. David, the smell of gasoline. And why was the smell so much stronger now? Subject, they shot our fuel tank. David, now do you remember, was it the British or the Americans or both? Was it a group effort or just one or the other? Did you ever hear about that later? Subject, deep breathing, getting a little emotional. It was the British. David, okay, and how many tanks did they have compared to your 13? Subject, I don't know. David, because it happened fast, is that right? Now what happened when your gas tank blew up, and you are just observing, what happened then? When you smelled that gas, take me through that. Subject, in a matter of seconds, the interior was full of fire. David, oh now let's just observe. What happened to everyone then? Subject, our tank exploded. David, now can you just observe and not get emotional? Can we do that together? Subject, yes. David, knowing you're protected, right? What happened next? It exploded, then what happened to Lieutenant Hertzof? What do you see? Just observing. How do you see yourself? Subject, sharp inhale, pause. David, just observe, and don't get emotional. What happened? Subject, deep breath, anxious swallow. My leg was blown off, and my body was thrown. I hit something and broke my jaw, and I don't remember anything after that. David, okay. When the tank was on fire, let me ask you this, did Lieutenant Hertzof try to get out of the tank while it was on fire? Subject, no, everything happened too fast. David, so, were you still in the tank when it blew up? Subject, I was still in the tank. David, but you remember that you got thrown around the tank and somehow your leg was blown off in the process. Is that correct? And then you hit your jaw. Is that what you remember? Subject, yeah. David, and then what? It was just over. Subject, that's it. David, which leg was it? Was it your left or your right leg? Subject, my left leg. David, now you are just observing. Was everyone else killed in the tank too? Jeremy and Philip and everyone? Subject, I could hear them screaming. David, were you already gone before they died? Do you remember? Or was everyone about the same time? Subject, I don't know. David, your leg was blown off and you hit your jaw, and that's all you remember from the tank. Is that correct? Subject, yeah. David, now I just want you to observe. What did you see next? Subject, nothing. David, was it just dark? Or was it light? What was it? Subject, there was nothing. David, so there was just kind of a void of nothing. No tanks, no noise, no smells, no light, just nothing. Is that correct? Subject, yes. David, were you scared at that point, realizing that everything was nothing? What were your thoughts at that point? What do you remember consciously when you were there? Were you scared or didn't care, or didn't have time to think about it, or what happened? How long was your nothing? Subject, pause, I don't know. David, but there was nothing. That means no light, no dark, no gray. Or was it gray? Subject, there was nothing. David, did you see anybody else in the nothing, or were you by yourself? Subject, I was alone. David, you were totally alone. Now let's think together. Let's go forward a little bit longer, just a little bit longer. How long were you in nothing? Subject, I don't know. David, let's not look so much at time. Let's try not to think of time, because that is where it is getting a little hard to quantify. Let's go to the end of nothing. Not thinking of time or hours or days or weeks or months, tell me what you saw at the end of nothing. What did you finally come across? What did you finally see after nothing? Subject, a pool of light. David, a pool of light. Was it a big pool or a small pool? Tell me about that pool. Subject, it's about the size of a large pond. David, so you found yourself in nothing, and then after a time, you don't know how long that was, suddenly, a pool of light came in? Did it come in all of a sudden, or did it just gradually come into where you were? Subject, it was sudden. David, so a pool of light came in sudden. What did that pool tell you, or what did you feel? What do you remember when you saw that pool of light? Subject: I was submerged in it. David: So you felt submerged in this pool of light. Is that correct? Subject: Yes. David: Describe that to me. Subject: It was warm. David: It was warm. What else? Subject: Pause. It felt like things were vibrating. David: Go on. Subject: Pause. I could see myself again. David: Okay. Subject: But my leg wasn't blown off. David: Continue. Subject: My jaw wasn't broken. David: Keep going. Then what happened? You saw yourself. Were you happy then? Did you feel whole again? What did you feel? Subject: I felt intact, but I felt sad. David: Why were you sad? Subject: Pause. I wept for my sins. David: You wept for your what? Subject: For my sins. David: And what sins did you see that you committed? Tell me about some of those. And remember, it's okay. What sins did you commit? Subject: Murder. David: Murder. And whom did you murder? Subject: Anyone our boss told us to. David: So you realized in the pool of light, seeing yourself whole again, that what your boss told you to do, killing another human being, was wrong and a sin. Is that correct? Subject: Anxious swallow, yes. David: And what other sins did you commit? Subject: Pause. I envied, and I lusted for power. David: Did you want to be more than a lieutenant? Subject: Yes. David: And how did you think you would get there? Would it take more murder? Give me some background on what you did. You lusted for more power. Tell me about that. Subject: I was intelligent, but I wasn't a good man. I was conniving. David: What else? Subject: I was willing to do whatever I had to do to the detriment of others. David: Keep going. What else did you realize about yourself? Subject: Pause, sharp inhale. Even though I loved my family, I would have killed them if I were ordered to. David: Wow. Was that one of the hardest things of all? Did that really hurt when you realized the wrongness of that? Subject: I wept for my sins. David: And did you weep alone in this pool of light, or did you weep in front of someone else? Subject: I was alone physically, but I felt presence with me. David: And give me some idea, who do you think that presence was? Subject: It was God. David: God. It was God you wept in front of, confessing your sins and realizing what you had done. Is that correct? Subject: Yeah. David: And what else can you tell me? What did God do when you wept in front of him? Did he say anything, or what happened after that? What was his response? Subject: God touched my shoulder, and he told me that it was forgiven. David: Was that pool of light? Did that feel like what we know as heaven to you? Subject: I don't know, but anything was heaven compared to the nothing. David: Did that nothing, that absolute nothing place you were, did you think in your mind, with what you knew as Lieutenant Hertzof, did you think maybe that was what they talk about as being hell? What were your thoughts on that? Subject: That was hell. David: So why did the pool of light come for Lieutenant Hertzof? What did God say to you? Why did he finally come for you into the nothingness? Subject: Well, in church we were taught that you had to do penance, and then you had to atone. The nothing was penance, but I would still have to atone for that life. David: Is that what God told you? You had to atone? Subject: Yeah. David: And how would Lieutenant Hertzof? Let's go forward a little bit more. Now you are just observing, that's all. How long did God stay with you then and talk to you? What did it feel like? Subject: I spent a long time there. David: And how long did you weep? Do you remember? Subject: It felt like an age. David: It felt like what again? Subject: It felt like an age. David: Now what is an age? Can you describe what an age would be, let's say in Earth years today? How long is an age? Subject: It felt like 1,000 years. David, so it felt like 1,000 years, and that's what's known as an age? Subject, yes. David, is that a unit of measurement in heaven, or what you thought was held to account for a certain time? An age? How did you know that? Did that just come to you? Or how did you ever hear of that? Subject, it was from a book. David, what book is that? Did you learn that in school or in church back in Germany? Subject, it was something a priest said. David, so it felt like an age or 1,000 years. Is that how long you wept? Subject, yes. David, and after you were done weeping, and God told you that you were forgiven, what did God say is beyond that? Can you share that? Subject, he said a life for a life. David, and what did he mean by that? Subject, that only by living on the other end of that violence, only by learning, could I undo the evils that I had committed. David, so was it like a karmic type thing that he told you? A life for a life? Subject, I suppose you could call it that. David, now what did it mean? You would have to learn what? By taking lives, what would you have to do next? Give me a little background. Subject, to kill is to become something other than human. You revoke your humanity by taking the life of someone else, and the only way to atone for that is to learn on the receiving end of that same violence in another life. David, and God spoke to you and told you that. Is that what you are telling me now? That is what you learned? Subject, yes. That is what I learned. David, so even though your boss told you to hurt others, that is not an excuse to kill, is that correct? Subject, yes. David, you still have to recognize, regardless of who tells you to do things, that if you take another's life, God doesn't look at someone telling you to do that as an excuse. Is that what you're telling me today? Subject, yes. David, okay. So, has God ever told people to kill, or what about all of that in the Old Testament? What can you share about that? Was God ever vengeful? Or you're not sure? How did he come off to you? Subject, God said, vengeance is mine. David, okay. But that doesn't mean human, is that correct or not? From your understanding. Subject, God said, vengeance is mine, the implication being that humans have to stay out of his way. David, does God ever? When you first encountered God, you felt he was that pool of light that engulfed you, is that correct? That lake of light? Subject, yes. David, was there anyone else that was with him in that lake of light to meet you? Was there Jesus or anybody else we know as ascended masters? Subject, no. David, so God came to Lieutenant Hertzof in that pool of light. And it was God, is that correct? Subject, yes. David, now when God spoke to you and said he forgave you, but you would have to atone for taking others' lives, is that something that will play out in future lives? Do you feel that is what your interpretation was? Subject, he said, it's forgiven, but you still have to atone. David, now that he told you that, did you feel relieved that you were forgiven by God? Did you feel relieved to be out of that void, that hell you mentioned? Subject, yes. David, did you stay in that pool of light for a while, that pool of love and light? Where did you go from there as that soul, Lieutenant Hertzof? Where did you go? Do you remember where you went? Subject, I don't remember. David, so let's go forward a little more. Now when God left and you were there, and you see yourself whole again, let's think about that for a bit. Did you see others eventually? Did you see houses? What did you see? Subject, I don't remember. I could sense the subject was understandably upset after reviewing that life, and was starting to shut down. Her reticence to provide further details was apparent after my last 2 questions. I felt it best to move past that life at this stage. David, would you like to not think any more about Lieutenant Hertzof? Knowing he's okay and he's forgiven. Subject, yes. David, okay, let's float away from that life. Erase all of the feelings, all of the thoughts. And let's think about something else. Let's forget all about that as you move forward in your bubble, as you coast along. Can you do that with me? Subject, yes. David, now let's think as you float along, back over that sea of flowers away from everything you just thought about. Forgetting all of those memories and moving on. Your mind's eye still open, looking ahead, seeing the sea of flowers in front of you. Moving along in this golden bubble, knowing the angels are with you. And you are going to move on and forget about any other pasts right now. Can you see that field of flowers as we float along? Subject, yes. David, what colors do you see in the field? What pretty flowers do you like and see? Subject, I see black-eyed Susans. David, okay. What others? Subject, daylilies. David, and how far above those flowers do you think you are as you're floating along? Subject, 2 feet. David, so you are floating right above them, is that right? Subject, yes. David, so float along above the flowers. And as you are floating above the flowers, looking at the beautiful flowers beneath you and very close, continue floating along. Just floating along. Feeling so good, feeling so happy. All of the stress and negative thoughts from that life are draining out of your body. Knowing that we're immortal, that was one life of many you've had, and life goes on. Can you do that with me? Subject, yes. David, so as you're floating along, you are going to move on. And you are going to picture an earlier time. Can we do that together? Subject, yes. David, in your mind's eye, stop for a moment just hovering over these flowers, and you are opening your mind's eye even more in the bubble. Knowing you are resting above this beautiful, safe field of flowers. Just stop here for a moment, just rocking back and forth on the breezes of your life and your journey. Above this beautiful field of flowers. Can you do that with me? Subject, yes. David, let's think about those little freckles above your eyelid. Those 3 little freckles. We're not going to think about anything else. What do those freckles symbolize? Do they mean anything? Are they from another life too, or what are your thoughts on it? Subject, they are a constellation. David, now you're just going to relax and let's look at them together. Just relax, knowing that angels and archangels protect you and no darkness or evil can come into your circle. You are protected in your bubble of golden light. Now what constellation do they represent? It's not coming from S-conscious, but coming from your subconscious in the bubble. What do they represent? Subject, Orion's belt. David, say that again, please. Subject, Orion's belt. David, they represent Orion's belt. Now why is that important? Tell me about that. What does that mean? Subject, it has to do with the constellations during the month that I was born. David, and was Orion in the house when you were born? Is that what you're telling me? Subject, yes. David, were there other constellations in your birth sign or birth chart? Subject, I don't know. David, but it was something that was important. That Orion was in your birth chart. Is that correct? Subject, yes. David, is there anything else you want to tell me about that? Any other significance? Subject, the Age of Aquarius. We are in the age. David, the Age of Aquarius. Is that what you've been told? Subject, it's in Mercury. David, say that again, please. Subject, it's in Mercury. David, are we entering what's known as the Age of Aquarius now? Subject, yes. David, and what can you tell me about that age, as you are floating along in your bubble? What can you feel about that age? What can you see? Subject, heightened creativity, innovation, an age of growth and progress. David, describe that progress. What do you mean by progress? Subject, psychic awareness. David, so the Age of Aquarius means progress in psychic awareness among humans? Subject, yes. David, all humans or just some humans? Give me some background on that. Subject, humans born in the Aquarius sign. David, so for humans born in an Aquarius sign, you see that they will have more heightened awareness or psychic abilities, is that correct? Subject, yes. David, are they the only ones on the zodiac chart, or who else? What other groups or months? What do you see? Subject, It's different for every sign. David, okay. But does it feel to you, when you look at those 12 signs, for the 12 months of the year, and not looking at this as just looking at it as what you are being told? What you feel in your subconscious as you float above the flowers? Stop for a moment just thinking. Are those born in the sign of Aquarius, are they going to be more psychic than the other 11 signs in your opinion? Subject, in this age. Yes. David, give me some ideas of what might happen with these Aquarians. What are they bringing for us, for mankind? Subject, they're going to be able to cross the barrier. David, cross the barrier. What barrier is that? Can you tell me that? Subject, that which separates us from the divine. David, now besides Aquarians, who else will be able to cross that barrier? Subject, anyone who's tuned in. David, and how does one become tuned in? What does that mean? Subject, has to do with intuition, looking inward. David, say that again, please. Subject, looking inward. David, now how do you know this? Have you heard this from your subconscious, the other side, or how do you know to look inward? Subject, I just know. David, so you just know that's how to cross the barrier. Is that what you're telling me now? Subject, yes. David, now how do we look inward? How do we do that? What can a person do to look inward? Can you explain that to me? What do we need to do? Though I had been meditating for quite some time and was well aware what inward meant, I wanted the subject to share her thoughts and interpretation of what going inward meant to her. I felt the subject was in a very deep superconscious state at this time based on her responses, providing information that was not requested or prompted on the current age that mankind has entered shows how deep her hypnotic state was. A superconscious state is the deepest state a person in a hypnotic trance can experience. At this state, one is tapping into their divine selves and profound information often results. Subject, meditation. We have to recognize the interconnectivity of all living things. David, gotcha, and then what? What do we do next? Or what happens if we can't recognize that, then how do we go from there? Subject, we have to transcend our earthly shortcomings. David, all right, tell me more about that. Subject, we have to give up the things that are not important. David, and what would those be? Give me some examples. Subject, we have to let go of greed, the things that we hunger for that don't feed our soul. We have to sacrifice. David, we have to what? Subject, to sacrifice. David, and how do we sacrifice? Subject, we try to become as much like God, as much like Jesus as we can. David, and who else would be up in that area besides Jesus? Who else that has laid a way for some people? Who comes to mind in other religions that might have helped others find the way? Subject, there are many people who have found the way. David, and this is what you feel is the time of the Age of Aquarius. Is that correct? Subject, yes. David, and how long will that time last in Earth years? What feels good for a number for you? Subject, it's hard to say, but I think it will be the next 40 years. David, the next what? Subject, the next 40 years. David, so you think over the next 40 years that the Age of Aquarius will become more of the view for everyone? Subject, yes. David, or just the ones that go with it? What are your thoughts on that? Subject, there will be leaders that come forth. David, say that again, please. Subject, there will be leaders from every nation. David, they'll be arriving, you're saying? Subject, they will come forth, and many of them will be under the Aquarius sign. David, will Jesus come forth as well, or will his spirit be with all of the leaders? Subject, this will happen before Jesus comes again. David, okay. Will they help pave the way for Jesus to come again? Subject, yes. David, like John the Baptist, perhaps? Is that what you're telling me here? Subject, yes. David, and will the leaders be in all nations? Subject, yes. David, and what can you tell me about these leaders? Where are they coming from? Or are they here now? Subject, they are here, or they are not yet here. David, so for the next 40 years, there will be some that come, some that are already here, and some that are yet to be born? Subject, yes. David, will they be on every nation on earth? Subject, yes. David, got it. Will they help lead or teach those that have not yet found the way inward? Subject, they will have their followings, respectively. David, tell me about some of these followings. Are they going to be held in churches, religious structures, or buildings? Where will these followings be held? Subject, they're not confined to any building. David, now are these answers coming from help that you are getting from the divine side? Subject, I just know. David, and how is our progress going now when we look at wars? When we look at the Middle East, and we see a lot of separation today with Christians fighting with Muslims and soldiers, and the innocent getting hurt, where do we stand on global separation? Where does the human condition stand right now? Subject, it's always darkest before dawn. David, so is this considered? How many years of darkness do you think before we enter the age of Aquarius more fully and realize its glory? Subject, I don't know. Human free will dictates, and free will is never static in nature. David, so has that not been determined? It's by free will? Subject, everything will be revealed later. David, do we see that some leaders will be able to help with the human condition and show that there's a way within that can get them closer to home or heaven than they are now? Subject, I don't understand your question. David, let's ask this question. There will be followings, but will these followings of the leaders, will these be more of a universal approach to where everyone is one, as opposed to separation practiced by some religions today? Subject, not every following will be a movement. David, will some try to share what their interpretation is of the words that Jesus spoke 2,000 years ago, among other ascended masters and the religions they built? Will the followings teach how to find heaven and God in their view? Subject, even good intentions are flawed. David, and what flaws in intentions? What could that be? Subject, we're still only human. David, so you see that maybe what starts out as good intentions can unravel into ego? Subject, yes. David, how can one continue to avoid those intentions by staying always with the light and always have the best intents of others in mind when they make decisions? Subject, to not elevate oneself. David, so you're saying, if one elevates oneself above those he is trying to help, it's bad, is that correct? Subject, yes. David, in other words, if one takes one's wisdom and tries to share it, but maybe at the same time, isn't as accepting as others on their path or journey at that moment, then that's putting themselves above another. Subject, you have to treat everyone as if they were your brother, the brotherhood of man. David, so if I look at everyone as my brother, the brothers I have right now, for example, and look at everyone in that particular fashion, not being upset with them for not seeing things the way I see things sometimes, but just having that love in my heart, will that keep me on the path of good intention? Subject, yes. David, so that should be my primary, foremost thing? Everybody I encounter, everyone I see, regardless of where they are on their path, or regardless of what they do, is that correct? Subject, yes. There can be no judgment. David, right. So good or bad, they are all my brothers. Subject, yes. One man's problem is the problem of mankind. If unjust, they will answer for the things that they've done. David, they will answer for what they have done, is that what you are telling me? Subject, yes. David, so a leader should accept all into his house for understanding regardless of their actions or thoughts, is that correct? Subject, they will not all be united though. David, so this time that we are in would be called the dawning? How long has the age of Aquarius been here? Subject, it started in 2008. David, not 1998? Like Edgar Casey might have thought? Or were we delayed 10 years? What do you think? Subject, it's possible that it was 1998.